So they climbed in their Bradleys and they headed back to that godforsaken place. They cleared several houses. They went in the last house Mark would be in. They cleared the bottom of the steps and he started up the stairs and he yelled, "On me!" And if your listeners have served, they know what he was saying. He was saying, I got the lean on this. You guys follow me. And as he went up the steps, he took fire through a window. And for the last and final time, he made the choice to stand into that line of fire. He willingly gave his life to save his teammates. And in America, we take that for granted every day. We don't realize the dear price that is paid for those freedoms that we get to enjoy each and every day. Now always challenge people and say, knowing that, go live your life worthy of that sacrifice. Go make your mark.
Debbie Lee, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I've been very excited to do this interview. I've been a huge fan of Mark and America's Mighty Warriors mission for a very, very long time. So why don't we start off the interview and you can take as long as you want with this part, but would you be willing to tell your story and Mark's story, from how he grew up to, SEAL Team 3 and everything?
You bet. So Mark came into our life kind of at a difficult time in my life. My mom had forbidden me to marry their father, and I was a strong-willed individual and very immature at 18, obviously. And so just to prove to her nobody forbids me to do anything, I went ahead and married him. Unfortunately, he had a problem with alcohol and was very violent and aggressive when he got drunk. And so at the age of 23, after he tried killing me, I went through a divorce. I had a 3-year-old, 18-month-old, and because of the violence, the waiting period was waived, so the divorce was final, actually the day that I filed, and found out 2 weeks later I was pregnant with Mark. So I've got a 3-year-old, an 18-month-old, and now I'm pregnant. I have no child support, no light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not sure, how I'm going to be able to support these kids and take care of them. And, but even from the beginning, he was just a very happy baby, easygoing, which was awesome amidst my circumstances. And, as he started to develop his character, he ended up in high school getting class clown 2 years in a row. But we saw that develop, from his knock jokes at 4 that were so bad. But he would fall on the floor laughing at himself because he thought they were so hilarious. And then you couldn't help but laugh at him, laughing at himself. So then he thought he was really good because you're laughing at his jokes. But anyway, just young man full of joy and kindness, would always stand up if you were being bullied or picked on. He would use his humor to go in there and, deflate the circumstance and stand up for you. But his older brother, Christopher, went in the Marines in August of 2000. His brother-in-law, Christopher, went in the Army in October of 2000, and Mark went into the Navy office, came out with a contract to go to BUD/S to try to become a SEAL in May of 2001. So all 3 of my kids' lives were involved in the military. Very proud of all of them for their service to our country. My brother served in the Air Force, so I can do the hoo-yah, hoorah, hoo-ah. And Air Force, I've asked and asked and asked. I guess you guys don't have a chance, so I made it up. It's jacuzzi, but lovingly, we pick on the Air Force. They do have better housing, better food. When I've been in Iraq and visited their bases, you could tell which ones were the Air Force run ones. But it takes all the branches of our military to help us be successful when we go into combat and when we defend our country. So very proud of all of them for their service. But as I said, Mark went in May of 2001. So on 9/11, I could see the handwriting on the wall. I knew I would have a loved one that would deployed. I had no idea that I would have one that would end up giving their life for this country and for the freedoms that we enjoy each and every day. But Mark always said it was all the military movies that I made him watch was why, my 2 sons went in the military, and have a son-in-law who did as well. But I think it was more than that. I think you come wired to be a warrior. I don't think that's something you can develop in your character. If you're not, you may be able to develop some strength. You may be able to do drills. But I think that warrior mindset that you come born with that, and very proud and blessed to have, two brave warriors in my family who defended the freedoms we enjoy every day.
Mhm. Yeah. Did Mark always have, in his vision, to be, join the military?
I think the first time that I heard him mention that, he'd watched a movie, about Navy SEALs in junior high school. And I think every junior high boy who watches a movie about Navy SEALs from Hollywood who glamorize it and, they get to do the cool things and blow things up and, they're strong, muscular warriors and they always get the beautiful women and they live happily ever after, who wouldn't in a junior high young man want to live that life?
Mhm.
But I think, when I noticed that he had a serious desire for that, he came home his freshman year in high school and said he wanted to be a professional soccer player. Well, I've always taught my kids that whatever you put your mind to, you can accomplish that. But when he told me that, I kind of had this dilemma in my head. I'm going, oh my gosh, the kid's never played soccer in his life before. But I've told him whatever you put your mind to. And so I said, okay, Mark, well, let's get you signed up. I homeschooled my kids, but they could play sports with the local public schools. So signed him up at the high school to play. And after he passed, his soccer coach that year was also a family friend. We lived in a small town of 5,000. And he shared that he thought Mark was probably the worst soccer player he'd ever seen. Obviously, he'd never played soccer before, so he didn't have any of the skills or talents, but he became the most improved soccer player that year. Like I said, having no skills and, applying some things you can improve pretty quickly.
Mhm.
He was the youngest soccer coach at his high school and was in fact trying out with the Colorado Rapids, the professional team in Colorado. Blew out his knee the night before tryouts, and he had to come home for surgery. And while he was recuperating, is when I started seeing him read more biographies of Navy SEALs. He started going to the pool. We'd never, we grew up pretty poor and never had swim lessons. So he started going to the local community pool and teaching himself to swim. And he would, do more intense workouts. He'd always been, physically pretty fit, but would, started focusing more on the intensity and the repetitions. And that's when I really was like, something's cooking in his brain. And it was, in fact, then shortly after that, that he went to the Navy recruiting office and came out with that contract to try to be a SEAL.
Yeah, so you mentioned that, he saw these movies of, Navy SEALs and, how Hollywood glamorizes them a bit. Um, during his buds training, did he ever, call back home and be like, "It's not what it seems like. It's so much harder."
We talked pretty regularly, and he would talk about the intensity, but I don't ever remember him saying, "Oh, it's much harder than I thought it was going to be."
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
he knew it was going to be hard. He was determined, to be successful in his mission to become a Navy SEAL. And yeah, I don't remember any conversations, where he talked about, "Oh my gosh, this is so much harder than I thought it would be."
Mhm. So, you started America's Mighty Warriors, um, and, so what exactly, is the mission behind it? And, you started it in, his memory, so why did you kinda start it?
Yeah, so I didn't wake up one day and say, "Oh, I think I'm going to start a foundation." It just kind of happened. I felt like we had lots of support between when we were notified that Mark had been killed and the funeral. And then after the funeral, I've been a widow for 30 years, so I come home and I'm by myself. I live in Arizona, so I'm not near the, SEAL base to have the support of the community there. Mark's teammates were still all deployed. They didn't come home till October. And as I was just beginning the journey of the grieving process for me, it was like, dude, this is too hard. I'm here all by myself. I got nobody to walk through this with me. And I'm not a person to have a pity party or feel sorry for myself. Me curling up in a ball and feeling sorry for myself wouldn't bring Mark back. It physically would, the stress destroys our bodies. And so, my choice, without thinking about it, just what was in my nature said, you know what, I'm going to put on Mark's boots. I'm going to pick up his weapon. I'm going to stay in the fight. And so I determined at that point that I would be there for other families who lost a loved one. I did not realize it would be so soon. It was about 7 weeks after Mark died that Mike Monsoor, who was on task unit bruiser with Mark, but on Delta platoon, jumped on a grenade to save his teammates. And when that happened, I knew I needed to go be there. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew that I needed to be there. It means so much when you're going through grief to have someone else there, to be there with you. And so I went over to do that. At the same time, Mark's teammates were coming home. And so I wanted to be there to welcome them home, not to be, oh my gosh, there's poor Mark's mom. We didn't bring Mark home, but to say, yes, the rest of my boys are home, Mark tried to explain the brotherhood thing to me before he passed. I'm like, yeah, I get it. You're close to these guys. You've trained hard with them. You've gone to combat with them, but as close as your brother you grew up with for 28 years? And he said, yeah, Mom, not close. And we had 5 of them in our home the week after Mark died. And I started to get a glimpse of that. I'm like, oh my goodness, they love Mark just as much as we do. And they're hurting just as bad as we are. And so while they were deployed, then we would have phone calls regularly, we'd emails back and forth. I have a platoon picture that hangs here on the office wall of the guys. And I'm like, okay, who's the last one on the left? And I'd write the name there and, go through. So when they talk about it, I could look at the picture and, see their face. A lot of them I spoke to family members that were back home. And so when they came home, I knew I wanted to be there to welcome them home and say, job well done.
Mhm.
And so that was about that same time of Mike Monsoor's funeral. Then I just happened to be in Washington, D.C. when we had another SEAL who his face was blown off. And another one that lost his legs. And pretty soon I'm like, okay, I get it, God. You've got a new mission for me. You've got something else for me to do. So officially, we started the foundation in 2008. We started with just the Heroes Hope Home, which is where our officers are as well, a place where Gold Star families can come stay for free. We pay for their airfare, their rental car, just love on them and pamper them and let them know we won't forget them and we won't forget their sacrifice. We now have one in Florida called the Serenity Hope Home. We do retreats in East Texas for them. Our Random Acts of Kindness program is the one that comes from Mark's letter. When's the last time you paid for a stranger's cup of coffee, meal, or tank of gas? We've expanded that program. It goes up to a $5,000 grant. Typically, that's more in a crisis situation, funeral expenses, suicide cleanup, children are in the hospital, with severe health problems. And then we do a lot of advocacy and education. So, we're up on Capitol Hill fighting for their funding, their benefits, their health. We pay for hyperbaric oxygen therapy for our veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury. So we're trying to get that passed legislation that's standard of care to pay for our veterans. One of the few things that's actually healing them. And that's our biggest program is our Helping Heroes Heal program. And with that, we are paying for the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a year of hormone and supplement therapy. We do retreats. We provide counseling through emotional resolution. We also have some nutrition counseling they go through. So just a great, well-rounded program. So that was kind of the process of me starting America's Mighty Warriors.
Mhm. Yeah, so you mentioned Mark's last letter home, and I've heard Jocko on his podcast, tell the story. If you're comfortable with it, would you mind telling the audience, the story of that last letter home, and then how Mark ended up giving his life to this country?
Yeah. And when I received that letter, it was written mid-July, so just a couple weeks before he was killed. And he sent it to, I think there was about 12 close family and friends that were on that email thread. And like I said, I homeschooled my kids in the written language. Not that Mark couldn't write, and make sense out of it, but I'd never seen that depth, of feeling and emotion and the way that he communicated so strongly in that letter. And it ended up being the last letter that we would receive to him, the last, written word that we got. I talked to him on the phone, but that was the last written word. And you read through that letter and you just sense the changes that took place in Mark, as he's over there in combat, in foreign country, the things that he saw and how they changed him and how important, they were to him. He talks about the great country that we live in and the obligation we have to keep it that way. And then, with, very humble, he's not like, he even says in there, I'm not saying look at me because all I did when I lived in America was take. And he said, when's the last time you paid for a random stranger's cup of coffee or a meal or a tank of gas? When's the last time you opened the door for a stranger? And he said, our reputation as a nation could be greatly changed by us just doing those things. And, I feel like we've been through so much division in our country the last couple years. And I've said often, if we just had that attitude, we don't all have to agree on everything. But if we all treated each other that way, this would definitely be a different country and our reputation would definitely be different. Mark was spot on there, but so much wisdom that he pulled through that letter, so much emotion that you feel when you read that. And, you would have to have no heartbeat to not be encouraged and to be challenged, when you read through that letter. But in retrospect, I look through there, and wonder if somehow he knew, what was ahead for him. And, we talk about August 2nd often. And, for me, a day that forever changed my life. And we had been notified, that he'd be killed and then started to piece together that amazing story of his heroic actions. And it was 115, 120 degrees that day. They had been fighting intense firefight for 2 hours in those extreme temperatures. How you do that is beyond me. I've been over to Iraq twice. I wore the body armor. I went out on patrol. I was there in winter and I was there in summer. So I experienced that extreme heat. One day when I was in Kuwait, when I was picking up my body armor, it was 130 degrees. It was just like, and granted, it's a dry heat. So, thank goodness it wasn't humid, but I can't imagine trying to run upstairs or run through streets. He carried the big gun. So he carried anywhere from 150 to 180 pounds in addition to his own weight. And I've been there. I smelled the smells. I felt the temperature. I've heard the sounds, but I still can't imagine how you could do that for 2 hours with bullets whizzing by your head. But, that's who these guys are. They're amazing warriors. And there were 4 of them on the rooftop. His buddy Ryan had been severely injured. The bullet had hit his weapon, and so he had severe shrapnel injuries to the head. And he dropped to the ground. 2 of the SEALs quickly dropped to help Ryan. Mark could have made that very same choice, but his choice was to stand up in the line of fire, right where Ryan had just been shot, knowing he probably had eyes on him to try to fire at him as well. But because they didn't have a medic up there, he knew the only way Ryan was going to survive was to get him out of there, and we needed the medic. And so he stood up in the line of fire to provide that cover so the medic could get up to the rooftop. The medic got up there and took one look at Ryan and said, we got to get him out of here immediately or there's no chance for survival. So not just once, but then a second time, Mark made that choice again to stand up in the line of fire, hoping he could provide that cover again so they all could move down off the rooftop. And they did. They sent Ryan off for medical attention and they got back to the base. I'm proud to tell you that base was named Camp Marc Lee in his memory, and I got to visit Camp Marc Lee in 2007. They got back there and they started to rip off their gear and get some water to refresh themselves. And I remember Chris Kyle telling me they're pretty sure that Ryan wouldn't make it, that he wouldn't survive. They were waiting for the call from the medic in the hospital. And actually, Ryan lived 3 more years and died from complications in a surgery, was living here in Arizona. But he did survive then. And the chief came in, said, we just found 30 of the insurgents that just attacked us. And without hesitation, Mark looked at his chief and he said, Roger that, let's go get them. They had done their mission for the day. They'd been fighting for 2 hours. I know because I've been to Camp Marc Lee, there's a huge Marine base on the other side. They could have said, go get some of the Marines who are fresh and haven't been out today and are gung-ho and ready to go. That's not who these guys are. So they climbed in their Bradleys and they headed back to that godforsaken place. They cleared several houses. They went in the last house Mark would be in. They cleared the bottom of the steps and he started up the stairs and he yelled, on me. And if your listeners have served, they know what he was saying. He was saying, I got the lead on this. You guys follow me. And as he went up the steps, he took fire through a window. And for the last and final time, he made the choice to stand into that line of fire. He willingly gave his life to save his teammates. And in America, we take that for granted every day. we don't realize the dear price that is paid for those freedoms that we get to enjoy each and every day. Now, always challenge people and say, knowing that, go live your life worthy of that sacrifice. Go make your mark. He definitely made his. I was blessed to be his mom, so I guess I made my mark. It's way to speak, but we do have an obligation to keep this nation the way that it is. We do have an obligation to thank those who paid that dear price for the freedoms that we enjoy every day. And that's why at America's Mighty Warriors, we're excited to always be there for our men and women who've served and sacrificed. We want to be there to support them through our programs, and for the families, other families who've lost a loved one. We can be there and let them know we won't ever forget your hero. We won't forget you.
Yeah, so Mark mentioned, in his last letter home about, how random acts of kindness can change the world. And, that's a big thing that America's Mighty Warriors is on. Um, so how do you think, in a way, because some people today are like, well, I shouldn't, you know, I can't do this because it won't make enough, a big enough impact upon the world. How do you think that, these simple random acts of kindness, like, buying a cup of coffee for a stranger, or buying their tank of gas, how do you think those in the long run will change the world?
Well, I think it's very much a domino effect. You think of going through, the coffee shop in the morning, you're in line in the drive-through to go through there. You don't know what the person in front of you has gone through today. You don't know if they just received word like I did on August 2nd that they've lost a loved one. You don't know, if they've had a fight with their spouse on the way to work, or they've just, got a call from the doctor and have terrible medical news. And you buying that cup of coffee is going to send that message to them. A total stranger did something kind for you today. And it changes your outlook on life, your focus on yourself and your inward. You're like, oh my gosh, and I know for me, when those things happen at those times that I'm struggling, obviously I'm like, okay, God, you knew what I needed today. You used somebody else to make an impact and touch me here. But how often then do you're like, dude, you know what? I was going to buy my coffee anyway. I'll buy coffee for the person behind me.
Hmm.
And that domino effect takes place. It changes your attitude and causes you to be grateful for something. And I always tell people, there's three things that help when you're struggling, whether it's emotionally, physically, whatever the circumstances. If you get up and find one thing to be grateful for before your feet even hit the ground in the morning, there is something, and it's been documented. I don't know if there's a, medical terminology for it, but that when you're have that, there's something that stirs and stimulates in your body that is contagious than the rest of the day. Your attitude, then tend to, even if something's tragic that's going on, you're like, oh my gosh, look at that beautiful sunset. Look at that beautiful flower or the butterfly. And we do that. There's something that changes in our metabolism when we do that. I also tell people to be physically active. I remember in the beginning, I didn't want to get out of bed. I just want to lay in bed and cry all day long. And I'm a believer and never audibly heard God speak, but in my thoughts, he was like, get up, go exercise. Thank goodness he didn't say go run a marathon, because I'd be like, there's no way. But he said, get up and go walk to the end of the driveway. I'm like, okay. Now, I don't think that's a major feat, because literally my driveway was just the length of my car. And I got up and did that, but I felt like I had done something that day. Even though it wasn't major, I had done something that day besides just lay in bed and cry. And then I'm competitive. So the next day I'm like, okay, walk a little bit further. So I walked to the end of the block. Again, there's only one house over, so it wasn't like a major accomplishment, but it was double at least of what I had done the day before. To the point of now I walk 5 miles at least every day. I don't go to bed if I don't have that in. There is a feel-good endorphins that's released when you're obviously not just walking to the end of your driveway, but when we're physically active, there is an endorphin that makes you feel good. And so that helps then in that thinking process. And then go serve somebody else. When we're doing stuff for other people, we're not focused inward. We're focused on others and how we can support them. And, that just makes such a difference in your life. And so I think that includes those random acts of kindness. You're serving somebody else by doing something else. You're taking a little bit of your money, making a little bit of a sacrifice. It's not great, just to let some other human being know that they're special, that you're thinking of them. And so I think then that effort, we see that then multiply in the domino effect as you do that for someone else. Then later in the day, they're probably like, you know what? That was pretty cool. I felt pretty cool when they did that for me. I'm going to do that for somebody else. And so then I think that does start to make a difference.
So in a way, these, random acts of kindness and America's Mighty Warriors are, Mark's legacy. What have you seen are, some of the biggest, impacts that Mark's story has had? People emailing you and saying, I heard about Mark's story and, this changed my life. What have been some of the biggest impacts of his legacy
Oh,
that you've
I,
heard of?
I have had numerous people, and not all of them veterans, who said, I had the gun laying on the table. I was going to take my life. And then I remember Mark's last letter home. And I'm like, dude, he gave his life for me. How can I take my life if he gave his life so I can live? We had one of our veterans who went through our program, and we do all branches of the military. We're heavy in the spec ops community because that's my family and a lot of the team guys. But I used to always follow up, and we still do this. I just have a program director who does it now, so it's not like we don't follow up for veterans, but to find out what symptoms were different after they went through our program. And typically, we see, the suicidal ideations are gone. Their focus before their memories are so bad, their sleep's bad, and so he's going through all this, explaining, how much better it was and what's changed and how he's sleeping good and he's getting REM sleep and deep sleep and he was super excited and he goes, "You saved my life." And I said, "Well, you were willing to give your life for me. This is a no-brainer that we would do this for you. Are you kidding me?" And he said, "Stop." And I was like, uh-oh, made a Navy SEAL mad. This is probably not going to end well. And he said, "I literally would not be alive today if it wasn't for you and your foundation and the therapies that you provided. You saved my life." And when he said it that strong and that boldly, I stopped and I thought back to Mark on his final actions, running into the line of fire 3 different times that day to save his teammates' lives. And I was like, oh my goodness, he is still saving his teammates' lives. He's not physically here, but he's still saving the lives. And I get on a regular basis, and it will be 19 years on August 2nd that Mark gave his life. And I, on a regular basis, get thank you cards that are mailed to us for, someone who's been through our program or someone who's read about Mark or someone that's been impacted somehow. And to have that consistency for 19 years just shows the impact of who Mark was, not just how he gave his life, but how he lived his life and the legacy that he has left behind.
Mhm. Yeah, and we talk about, how, joyful, um, and, joyful Mark was, and I believe, I heard, Jocko say, he was like, all these other, SEAL team guys are just solemn and everything, and then Mark's just this joyful person, has a Bible with him, reading it and everything. Um, has there been any, impact of, because I don't remember exactly who I heard say it, but, when people are about to go into battle, you know, that's like, "Hey, I'm not a Christian, but I need you to pray for me because this is the one thing that seems like it will help me." Um, has there been any, impact that you've seen in the, the people that Mark worked with or other SEAL teams or other branches of the military where they're like, I see, Mark was reading his Bible and he had all this joy, unlike some of the other guys. So it's now like, I'm going to start, questioning that and what do I actually believe?
Yeah, we see a lot of our, veterans and people who follow, Mark's story and what we're doing in America's Mighty Warriors, who then, ask questions, want to know more. They want to know where I get my strength from. How can you go through the toughest thing you've ever been through in your life and still, be joyful and positive? And um, yeah, there's been lots of decisions that have been made for people, not just lives saved here physically, but lives that have been saved for an eternity and that are in heaven today because of Mark. And I think one of the coolest stories is our program director, Callie Mayerall, who was a teammate of Mark's. He was shot that deployment, so he had gone home because he almost lost his leg. So he wasn't in country, when Mark had been killed, but he was really struggling for several years and actually had a gun to his head probably about 3 years ago now. And through our conversations, through our programs, he is a changed man. He's a changed man, not just physically, but in his faith, and is a committed believer now who, prays before every one of the phone calls that he has with any of the veterans he speaks with, you know, is digging into his Bible and reading his Bible daily. And yeah, that's the best life change that there could be is that life change. And, for me, there is no way that I would still be standing. I've been through, if you listen to the Jocko podcast, I had been through a ton of garbage in my life. And I would have so been justified when I found about Mark, and without my faith, that's where I would have turned to. I would have said, you know what, time out. Too much has happened in my life. I can't take this anymore. This is too much. And I would have taken my life. But because I knew who Jesus Christ was, I knew his character. I knew he didn't cause Mark's death. I knew he'd revealed himself to me over and over. He was my strength. He was my rock. He was going to get me through this. Um, I must admit that I'm surprised, how cool it has turned out. The impact that he has made, I had no idea or had a vision how the foundation would grow and develop and turn into what it is, or that Mark's legacy, would literally be known worldwide and change people around the world. I get letters from foreign countries all the time as well, letting us know that in this country or that country that Mark's still making a difference over there too.
Yeah. So you mentioned, how you've become, a Gold Star mother and visited Camp Marc Lee and everything, and walked in, the armor and been there in the summer and the winter. Would you mind sharing that story of going to the base and seeing where it actually happened?
Yeah, and I think, lots of people have asked me, knowing that, I've been over to foreign country, they're like, "Did you get closure? Did you feel like that brought you closure?" I'm like, "Well, first off, I wasn't going over there for closure. I don't know, as a mother especially who, birthed their loved one who gave their life, I don't know that you ever get closure and get over it. You learn ways to cope, you learn ways to manage the grief, but that's not why I went over there anyway. The first trip I went over, I was taking care packages and Christmas presents and Christmas decorations to be able to, on behalf of everyone else in America who couldn't go over to Iraq, take a little piece of America over to them at Christmas time. And I remember, my flight in there was at nighttime, and it was weird. I'm on this C-130. We flew commercial to Kuwait, but then flew military from Kuwait over to Iraq. And my background's aerospace science, so I know how a plane lands. And all of a sudden, we're doing a corkscrew, like you would if the plane's about to crash. You're spinning out of control is kind of what it felt like. Um, I didn't hear the stall warning horns going off or anything, so I knew they were still very much in control of the flight. And I later learned that's what they do. They change up their flight patterns so the enemy can't figure out, how you're coming in, what leg of the flight you're going to be on, and take the planes down. But I can get a little motion sickness, so my stomach started getting a little queasy, and made it. Did not get sick, but landed on the tarmac there, and we got out, and all of a sudden I'm hearing, explosions. I'm like, okay. And as I was coming in, I was like, I wonder what Mark's thinking. I wonder if he's like, oh my goodness, Mom, what the heck are you doing going into a combat zone? Or, probably what he's like, woohoo, that's my mom. Look at, check this
Yeah.
out. But as we landed and got off and I heard those explosions, I'm like, okay, here's the reality of it. I knew I was coming into a combat zone. We went into the hangars there. And of course, later I learned that it was actually just controlled detonations. So other armament of the enemies that they got, and that they were, blowing up and exploding on purpose so that they wouldn't have access to it. But nobody briefed me. Nobody told me that.
Mhm.
And hmm, excuse me, that it was an amazing experience to be able to go over there. We had been awake for about a little over 48 hours between the flights, and I didn't sleep on the flight. And we had been doing rallies and events in New York before we took off. And so I went in as an embedded reporter was how I got over there. And we were waiting to get our credentials, and they said it's probably going to take a couple days because it was a holiday for the Iraqis. And they pointed me to my cot where I could go sleep. And I'm like, oh, awesome. I'm so tired. And I just fell asleep. I was probably asleep about 45 minutes of deep sleep. And they came in and they said, your transportation's here to take you, to your base. And when I had talked to Mark's teammates about this crazy idea that I had, obviously I didn't have a death wish, but I just wanted to know what they thought about that. Is it okay? Do you think that's, I'd love to be able to do this. And they said, yeah, just don't take any ground transportation. Make sure if you're going anywhere, they're flying you to wherever you're going. So when they came in to tell me my transportation, they said, your MRAP's here. Well, I knew MRAP was ground
Mhm.
transportation. I know they're, have a lot of up armored extra protection on it, but I knew what an MRAP was. And I'm like, oh man, I can't go. Excuse me, I'm Mark's mom. I need a plane. I can't take ground. I'm like, nope, if it's good enough for the troops, it's good enough for me. And as I said, it was a holiday. And so as we're, driving to the base that I was going to be stationed at Balkan, I heard gunfire and stuff happening. I'm like, yeah, that's the same response. Okay, I'm in the combat zone. And didn't know until later that it was just some celebratory. They were, like we do on New Year's, but, with their firearms shooting stuff off. But was embedded with the 1st to the 4th cab at Fob Falcon. And that's in the Dora neighborhoods, which is where we went out on patrol, just on the outskirts of Baghdad. And it was amazing to be able to go out there, smell the smells, see the dirt that's like moon dust that just kind of when you step goes poof, poof. And never was fired on, didn't have any IEDs explode around me or anything happen. Not that it couldn't have, but didn't experience any of that while I was over there. We did have the colonel that I was with had a meeting with one of the sheikhs, and it was not a planned meeting. And we had gone off the main route a little bit. And, they're like, hey, just, wait here in the vehicle. And the hair on the back of my neck kind of stood up at one point. So I don't know if there was something going on, but again, not that we ever had any explosions or anything happen. But amazing opportunity to love on the troops. And then went back in 2010. 2007, I got to visit Camp Marc Lee. Flew over in the middle of the night. And at the time, the SEALs were just flying at night. The helicopters wouldn't fly during the day. So they flew me over early evening and then flew me back that same morning. But amazing experience to see where Mark slept, where his where he kind of lived while he was over there. It was full moon that night, and it was actually one of Saddam's palaces that was there. And so got to go to the top of the palace and look out over the um, Tigris or Euphrates. Now I don't remember, but they both kind of come close together in that region. So I don't remember which river it is right there, but the moonlight was shining on it and it just looked beautiful from up there. And I really could, sense this is where Mark would go when he wanted to be contemplative and to think about stuff. And, obviously in the beginning, if they went up there, they were being fired on. So, in 2007, a year and a few months later, it was a little calmer over there. And they really did make a huge difference. And then went back in 2010. Nobody was going outside of the wire at the time. And so just went to a change of command, flew up to Tikrit, that got to see the zoo where Saddam had a zoo for his children. Not a public zoo, but it was like our zoo's that big, but for his children. And just the craziness. There were palaces all over that he had. On Camp Liberty and Camp Victory, there were several palaces. And it was like victory over Iraq, victory over America. It was what he titled the different palaces. And there was one palace that was, I don't remember what the name for this one was, but it was where he would get the virgins and have his way with them. And then afterwards would either behead them or throw them off a balcony, and then would put a heart shape on the lattice, in the plaster to remember them. I'm like, what a sick person, And there were mass graves that were found with over 500 of his people in several of the mass graves. And unlike, people talked about they never found weapons of mass destruction, which they did. They just secretly got the yellow cake. It wasn't the whole, it was what they would use to make the weapons of mass destruction. But I'm like, that man was a weapon of mass destruction. How do you find 500 graves of your own people and not say he wasn't a weapon of mass destruction? But just the evilness, you know, that you see over there. He had taken and turned the water off, stopped the rivers. I guess you turn the water off, but dammed up the rivers so no water was coming into their city for 3 days. So he could make a moat and a river around his palaces because he felt like Allah couldn't see his evil that he was doing if there was water surrounding it, which, is that all the bigger your God is that he can't just look right down on you and see the evilness you're doing. But anyway, a lot of corruption, a lot of evilness that even in America, we've never seen anything like that. But it was awesome as I relate to the veterans to be able to understand that a little bit better, to smell what they smelled, to see what they saw, to get a glimpse. So as we're working with them and helping them through these issues, from combat, that,
Mhm.
we've got a little better understanding.
Yeah. So as you've seen, different people come back from combat and, you know, come back from, maybe the wars ended or middle of war and, you're friends with all these other people who have seen different things and you've actually been there. Um, and with kind of the political shifting winds, um, would you recommend that, young men, join up in the military and, go and fight these wars?
And that's definitely changed because with the last administration, I was telling young men, and I had a grandson even that was looking at going to the Naval Academy, and he came to that same conclusion that he did not want to serve under what the other options were. But I think definitely now with Trump being in office, we're seeing recruiting come back up again. Young men have a commander in chief that knows will protect them and will give them what they need. And when they come home, will support them. And I do think that's a very noble thing to do. I do think that you are called to do that. As I said, I have parents that'll call me and say, "Oh, my child wants to go in the military. I'm freaked out. I don't want them to do that." I'm like, you can't unmake them a warrior. If they came to be a warrior, that's what God has designed them to do. But, I've other ones were like, "I wish my kid would go in the military. I've tried to motivate them." I'm like, well, they probably didn't come wired as a warrior. You're not going to, you can't unmake them and you can't make them if that's not how God designed them. But I think definitely if, they're called to that they should follow through and they should serve our nation. That's a very noble thing. Thank goodness we have men and women who have been willing, through the centuries to stand for us and defend us and keep us free.
Mhm. So if Mark were here today, what do you think that he would, say slash tell people, what to do and um, maybe as all these other people are doing something else. If he were here today, what would he say to people?
I think he said it. I think he said it in his last letter home. I think all those things that were so important to him, he communicated that. I think if, he's coming back now after being in heaven, I think the first thing he'd say is, dude, don't wait. Make that decision today. I've been to heaven. I got to be in the presence of my Savior, and I want all the rest of you to be with me. So, you know, do that, do your diligence and do that research and, choose Christ as your Savior, Lord and Savior. And, that came across in that letter too. Maybe not that, pointed in the letter, but I know that would be, the first thing is don't wait, make that decision today. Christ gave his life for you so that you could live for an eternity. Mark gave his life so that we could live free here.
So, as America's Mighty Warriors does all of these different things like the random acts of kindness and then the retreats and the, financial assistance and therapy assistance, what is the future of America's Mighty Warriors look like?
Well, we're going to continue strong to be able to do that. We also are looking for property or a facility to buy as a retreat facility where we can host the retreats at our own facility, but also have a hyperbaric chamber there where the veterans can come stay for a month and get the treatment that they need all in one place. They can get the hormone and supplement therapy, and they get the blood labs there, and just do some healing. We want it to be somewhere that's in nature, some, maybe mountainous areas where they can go hunting, fishing, hiking while they're there because the outdoors is so important to their healing process. as well. But we continue to grow. We've had over 500 veterans go through our year-long program. We've had impacted probably 2,000 Gold Star families and given them hope and encouragement. But that also, those visions and that growth, means that we need additional support. So if any of your listeners can support us by setting up a recurring monthly donation, we've got 20,000 people on our list. If they signed up just to give $5 a month on a recurring basis, we have one older gentleman that has done this for about 10 years. And every time I get that check, I just sense he's probably on a limited income, and that's probably a sacrifice for him. But we can all afford to do $5 a month. Maybe that means you don't go to Starbucks and buy one cup of coffee. Maybe that means, you make that sacrifice and don't go out to eat and, cook at home and use that extra money to support our veterans and our Gold Star families. But that's important. And, if you've got a service that you can donate, that's something that we would normally pay for. If you're CPA'd, you can donate an audit. If you're, whatever skill or service you've got, we probably could use that, to help better the program. If you've got financial ability to give a larger level, please do that. We're getting ready to host Mark's birthday bash, the big event that we do each year at Scottsdale Gun Club. And this year it will be March 22nd. If you can be a sponsor, reach out to us at americasmightywarriors.org or buy tickets for the event. There's so much that you can do. Check out our store, the merchandise. All those books tell Mark's amazing story, whether it's written by me or I'm a co-author. I haven't written any of the whole books, but I'm co-author in several. Mark's teammates that write about him. We've even got kids' leadership books, The Way of the Warrior Kid. That's Jocko, Mark's task unit commander, that writes those. And the little boy in the story is Mark. It's not his life story. There's some similarities, but it's not his life story. But Jocko wanted to be able to honor Mark by making him the main character. And that's actually coming out as a movie. Chris Pratt will be playing Uncle Jake, who is Jocko in the story. But that'll be coming out in June. So excited to have that additionally there. But just so grateful that I was blessed to be Mark's mom. God could have picked anybody else. And I had that blessing. And that we can continue to take care of our men and women and Gold Star families that serve and sacrifice. It's an honor to be able to do that. And when God calls me home, I'm ready, but I will finish strong my mission here until he does.
Well, so for closing, where can, I guess multiple questions in one, where can the general public find out more about you and Mark's story and, everywhere America's Mighty Warriors is? And then where can, what would be advice or thoughts that you would give to a younger generation growing up and looking at options like the military and things like that? And then veterans who are looking for assistance, where can they get started?
Yeah. And they can reach us at americasmightywarriors.org. Our email is the same thing, americasmightywarriors@gmail.com, or our office number is 623-537-5322. If you have any questions about our program, if you're a veteran or a Gold Star family that wants help, please reach out. We would love to be able to be there for you. And then I think your other question was those who want to serve. I think that's a noble and honorable thing to want to do that for your country. And just thank you to each one of you who have served and sacrificed, and your families who give so much so that we can live free every day. And I would encourage all of you to go make your mark. Do something in this world, whether it's a random act of kindness today, whether it's something that's going to impact your world and your sphere of influence, just like Mark did.
Well, all those links will be in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
You bet. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.